Okay, everybody, we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. I'll put it back up there in a minute. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I want to thank the IWCA for sponsoring this event and for the IWCA Outreach Committee for all its help in planning and organizing the event. Thank you to everybody. My name is Holly Ryan. I'm the current secretary of the International Writing Center Association, and I have a few notes before we get started today. First, we have two interpreters with us, Katie Fitzpatrick and Valerie Boyer. You can see them on the screen. We work today to try to make it so that they will always be on your screen if you are in gallery view, but technology is what it is and doesn't always do exactly what I want it to do. So if you need to, you can go right click on their pictures. You can see interpreter Valerie and interpreter Katie. They're going to be switching back and forth, but you can click on their picture, whoever's currently signing. And if you right click on it, you'll see pin video, and that will make that video stick on your screen. And then you can unpin it and switch to the other interpreter if you need to. Like I said, I hope they're always going to be here, but if they're not here for some reason, that's a workaround that you can use. Also, you'll see at the bottom, there is a button for questions and answers. You can post your questions there, and I'm going to be moderating that box. We will be asking those questions of the presenters after everybody has presented. So don't panic if your question isn't answered immediately. We'll get to as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the hour. Finally, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this presentation is being recorded. You can view the recording on the IWCA website once it gets posted. Ideally, that would be within the week, but let's say within 2 weeks, just to be safe. I'll send an email out to let people know that the recording is up. Please share it widely. Anybody that couldn't be here today, send it to them. Anyone that's interested, you know, your dog sitter, anyone that would be interested about online tutoring, please share the video with them. So it goes without saying that this year has been unlike any others for so many of us as we scrambled in the spring to try to move all of our tutoring services online. Many of us have never tutored online prior to March of 2020. Others of us used it, but as a supplement to our daily face-to-face practices. But others, like our presenters today, have been using or been fully immersed in online tutoring practices, either every day in their centers or as part of their research for a really long time now. And I'm so grateful that they have taken the time to share their expertise with us. I know I'm looking forward to taking lots of notes today, going back and rewatching the video and really learning from our colleagues. So thank you so much. I'd like to go ahead and introduce all of them at the start, and maybe they can just wave when I say their names, and then they'll, I'm sure, reintroduce themselves as we go through the presentation. So first, Dan Gallagher is the director of the Effective Writing Center at the University of Maryland, and he's been there for almost 10 years. He's working remotely from Philadelphia. Hi, Dan. And he's going to be presenting today with Amy Maxfield, who is the lead advisor for training at the University of Maryland Global Campus Effective Writing Center. She worked as an online writing tutor and a fellow in that center from 2005 until 2010 before she took on this position. After they present, Janelle Dempsey is going to be presenting on synchronous tutoring, and she has 8 years of experience studying and training consultants for online writing center work. She is the co-founder of the Online Writing Centers community and currently works at North Central University, which is a fully online university. After her presentation, she's going to throw it over to Megan Beauchart-Burrell, who is at the Old Dominion Writing Center, where she's the director and a composition lecturer. She's also a PhD student at Old Dominion and working on a dissertation related to online tutoring. And she's going to present today with Kim Falig-Peck, who is the director of the Writing Center at York College of Pennsylvania. Her research focuses on online and digitally supported instruction, labor in the Writing Center, and undergraduate research. She is also the co-editor of Young Scholars in Writing, so encourage your students to send their work to Young Scholars. And she serves as the web coordinator for MACA, the Mid-Atlantic Writing Center Association. We are so fortunate to have these experts here with us today, and I am so thankful that they offered their time. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dan and Amy as soon as I pull up the PowerPoint and start sharing my screen. So give me 2 seconds. Almost, promise. And I think that the other presenters are going to turn off their videos. I'm going to turn off mine as well. And hopefully that means that the signers will be right at the top. Fingers crossed. Whenever you're ready, Dan and Amy.
Okay, thank you. Amy?
Yes.
Would you care to just get right into it?
I will. We're very glad to be with you today. Hello. Our objective today is to share how we at the Effective Writing Center provide asynchronous writing tutoring for UMGC students in order to support you as you transition to your online services. We understand that the timing of this was unexpected for many of us, to say the least. So we're glad to be with you as we all adapt to the new normal. Next slide, please. So Dan's going to begin with a brief overview of UMGC. Then Amy will get into the nuts and bolts of how we advise students asynchronously. Next, Dan is going to cover some of pros and cons of online asynchronous tutoring, as well as how we try to manage these. And finally, I'll wrap up our part of the workshop and discuss tutor training. Over to you, Dan.
All right, thank you so much, Amy. So next slide, please. Just going to give some background about UMGC, which is the University of Maryland Global Campus. We've focused on distance education since the school was founded in 1947 as the University of Maryland University College, so that might be the name that you're more familiar with. As correspondence classes gave way to online learning in the late 90s, UMGC was one of the leaders in transitioning to internet-based classes, and by extension, online support services. Student body at UMGC is largely adult learners. They're enrolled part-time, they're typically working full-time, and a significant percentage of them, about 60%, are military or military affiliated. As of fall 2019, the total unduplicated student headcount was nearly 60,000. So we're a rather large institution. The UMGC Effective Writing Center has been exclusively online for over a decade and a half. And we believe that the online tutoring environment, and especially the asynchronous service, presents the best support option for our students who are taking their classes remotely while managing their families and their careers. Next slide, please. During the 2019-2020 academic year, our tutors provided 8,451 asynchronous tutoring sessions to undergraduate and graduate writers. We also offer synchronous tutoring in Zoom, but 92% of our one-on-one interactions with students were via our asynchronous tutoring program. We attribute this largely to the nature of how our students work, often in limited time frames when committing to a solid hour of working with someone simply might not be possible. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about who our tutors are. So we have about 40 tutors on staff at any given time. All of them work remotely from various locations worldwide, as you can see represented on this map. All our tutors are part-time and all have at least a bachelor's degree. So our staff is not made up of peer tutors in the traditional sense. They work anywhere from a few hours per week up to 19. The state of Maryland sets the limit for this class of employee at 19 hours per week. Our tutors record the time that they work, and we ask them to average no more than an hour and a half per paper review. Just like in face-to-face writing centers, some sessions may take more time, particularly when working with writers who are new to the writing center, or those who are writing more complex upper-level undergraduate or graduate projects. Other sessions, such as brainstorming, might require less time, so we look at an average. Our administrators periodically compare the hours each tutor works to the papers they review, and if they're consistently averaging over 1.5 hours, we can intervene and offer strategies and professional development activities. Now, Amy is going to share some of our asynchronous tutoring process. So over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Dan. Slide, please. So on this slide, you can see a streamlined version of how students submit work and receive feedback from us. After logging into their personal UMGC student accounts, they access a submission form. And on this form, they can include details about the assignment and any specific concerns they might have, as well as attach a paper for review. Most of our students submit Word documents, but we can also accept and review PowerPoints and other types of documents if needed. The supervisor on call receives the request and assigns it to the next available tutor, and then the tutor has 24 hours to write and upload advice. The supervisor then does a quick quality check on the document before returning it to the student. Our official turnaround time for the student is 48 hours, but our last analysis indicated that the average turnaround is just over 24 hours. It's also worth noting that the process described here is in place at the moment, and it has been this way for many years, but it's going to change in some ways this fall when we begin tutoring using the tutor.com as our delivery platform. Slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the format of the advice. Certainly, there are many ways to deliver asynchronous advice. Some writing centers have dedicated platforms. Others use screen recordings with audio so the tutor can explain revisions as they identify areas for improvement. And some use the insert comments or track changes features in Word or Google Docs. At the IWCA, we use a standard template in Microsoft Word in which the tutor explains what, how, and why to revise. The sections within the template are structured so that the major elements or higher order concerns are addressed before the sentence level concerns. We do not embed or insert comments into the student's paper text. We paste it below our advice so everything is contained within a single document. Tutors can still address specific passages of the paper by copying and pasting them into the advice. We think that there are several benefits to this approach. First, students can read the revision suggestions within the context of our advice. Next, the revision ideas are organized within our template, whereas embedded comments are organized within the student's paper. We want our advice to be ideally a how-to guide for the revision, so the student has a prioritized plan for improvement. And we think a standalone advice document gives students a chance to practice critical reading skills, which in turn facilitate writing development. Finally, it ensures consistency among advice, though we encourage tutors to use their own style and personality and techniques within the advice itself. For writing centers switching to or adding asynchronous tutoring for the first time, adapting the form or reporting method used face-to-face could be a useful way to make the transition smoother and more organic for both tutors and students. Slide, please. It's also a good way to ensure that we've shared our policies and information about other services with students. On this slide, we have an excerpt from the advice template, and this information is already in the blank version that the tutor opens when they're ready to write advice. We'll show more of the advice template in a few minutes when we discuss training, but first, Dan will talk about the pros and cons of this type of tutoring. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Amy. Could I get the next slide, please? Okay, so we've talked about who we are and how we operate. We'd like to share what we see as some of the advantages of asynchronous online tutoring. There's a great deal of flexibility for both students and tutors. We're providing a written record or a how-to guide for revision. So we're not relying on the student to take notes during a face-to-face session. They kind of have everything that they need for a revision plan right in front of them. They can skim or skip around or use it as a checklist. and ideally use information in future writing assignments. Over time, students who are repeat users build their own libraries of resources from the advice. This method allows tutors to model effective academic writing in their feedback. So we're giving students a view of what making an evidence-based argument would look like. Students are visual learners. Models can be helpful, especially with citations and formatting. And tutors can include links to other resources or embed videos or audio files. And we found that tutors like having the time and space to review and revise. Sometimes the goals of an assignment or areas for revision come into focus as the tutor writes the advice. I think we've all had that experience of clarifying ideas through the process of writing. Revision can benefit the advice as much as it does the original writing. We move on to the next slide, please. Certainly there are potential disadvantages as well, and we want to address those. We'd also like to share how we mitigate and manage some of these disadvantages. First off, and if you've already started, you might have noticed this, tone can be very difficult to interpret in online text-based interaction. To help with this, we try to keep our advice very positive by approaching every revision as an opportunity for students to meet assignment requirements and convey ideas more effectively. Finding a tonal balance isn't necessarily easy, but as tutors learn to do so, it becomes easier for them to teach students to do the same. We emphasize benefits of revision as much as possible, and we encourage tutors to share their own experience. For example, when I'm working on X, I find it helpful to do Y. And we don't underestimate the power of a smiley face emoji. Sometimes that can just change the way that a student interprets the text that they're reading. Could I have the next slide, please? In an asynchronous session, there's no opportunity to have a real-time conversation with the tutor or to have immediate follow-up questions. This is probably, in my opinion, the biggest drawback. In the advice document, we include information about how students can contact us if they would like clarification or have additional questions. And we also encourage them to submit revised drafts. Because our tutors review the student's history prior to developing advice, we can still create something of a dialogue over time, referencing how students have improved or rephrasing past advice to approach areas in which they have not. Could I have the next slide, please? Thirdly, many of us have to quell the urge to address everything in the advice. And this is not to say that this well-meaning urge isn't present in face-to-face sessions, but it can be more of a force when it's just you and your laptop. Having an average time per review helps with this because in most cases you can't cover everything in 60 or 90 minutes. Also, when we're writing feedback for papers that would benefit from a lot of revision, we try to think of what the student would ideally do next in the writing process instead of trying to address everything, which is impractical and non-beneficial for both tutors and students. And the next slide, please. Finally, for some writers struggling with writing, having to read more writing can be overwhelming or frustrating. So focusing on the next instead of the everything helps, as does identifying patterns and prioritizing sense-making issues. If possible, a one-on-one virtual synchronous meeting is a much better option for some learners. We recognize that. Synchronous advising only makes up about 5 to 10% of our one-on-one interactions, but we do find that students who try it frequently become regular users. And you'll hear a lot more about synchronous online advising in our next portion. But for right now, I'm going to pass it back to Amy, who will discuss how we train tutors to work here.
Great, thanks, Dan. All of our training is self-paced, synchronous, and totally online. Tutors complete a series of readings and activities in an online forum. These cover everything from writing center theory to what to expect during a typical asynchronous tutoring shift. We think the online training helps prepare tutors to support online students because they're able to appreciate and understand the experience of learning online a little better. Our training culminates with simulated tutoring, where tutors write advice for sample student papers, and then they receive feedback from the training coordinator. Again, the idea is that by responding to writing with writing, we're preparing tutors to do the same. We find that the simulation of the tutor and student's actual interaction helps them to be more confident in the asynchronous online environment. And as a side note, when we're training tutors who were part of our team in the past and have come back, or we're working with a current one to iron out any wrinkles in their method, we just focus on simulations. So if you're training tutors who have already had face-to-face experience at your writing center, you might have a much more concise training program that focuses on simulations in whatever format you choose for your center. Next slide, please. So we talked about our advice template a little earlier, and we use a blank version in training that includes guidance and suggestions about how to share feedback with the student. On this slide, I've included the first 2 pages of the blank template, and you'll notice the aqua highlighted text. All of this will be replaced with personalized advice from the tutor in the final version of the advice document. You can see the greeting, the information about our services, the overview of advice right there. All of our tutors use the same blank template, but the guidance in the aqua text was designed to help trainees and new tutors develop the advice without having to necessarily refer to a lot of other documents for examples as much as possible. It also serves as a gentle reminder for experienced tutors, just to make sure that they include everything in their advice. Next slide, please. So here you can see the next page of the template, which contains what we think is arguably the most important part of it for both student and tutor, which is assignment management. We ask tutors to complete the table and assignment management section in all of their asynchronous advice. And we find that this is a really effective way to not only indicate revision needs, but also emphasize the progress they've already made. In addition, once the tutor has completed the table, they'll have a much more thorough understanding of the paper requirements, which in turn makes it easier to plan what to discuss in the body of the advice. So even though that might take a little more time up front, once you've done that, you have a much better sense of what you need to cover with the student and what you're going to say. So it saves time later on. Next slide, please. So if anyone's interested in the complete version of our template, we'll be happy to share it. But in the interest of time, we'll just take a look at our tutorial hierarchy pyramid, which lists the other sections of the template. We use this infographic and others like it in training to reinforce our approach to advising. So you can see there's assignment management like we talked about, then you have thesis and organization, development and research, formatting and citations, and grammar and mechanics. And next slide, please. So thank you. We enjoyed speaking with you today. And again, if you're interested in any of our materials that we use in training or interested in having a copy of our template, we're more than happy to share those. Next slide. And back over to you, Holly. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Sorry, I'm just interrupting because I think we've worked out all the interpreter. I hope everybody can see them now. I think we've got it, but please message me if, I don't know, I mess it up again. So I'm going to mute myself again and send it back over to Janelle.
Hi everyone, my name is Janelle Dempsey and I'll be presenting on synchronous consulting in the Writing Center. I designed and led about 12 semesters of training for one-on-one synchronous consulting at a brick and mortar institution. Currently, I lead synchronous group writing sessions for the Institutional Review Board application at North Central University. My title slide features an open laptop with the words "Join us online" written in orange font on the screen. Next slide, please. If you'd like to follow along with me, you can download my presentation materials from my website at jmdempsey.com, spelled JMDEMBSEY.com. I've also put this link in the chat, and I'll put it back in there again. You are also welcome to use the synchronous training materials on my website and modify them for your writing center. Next slide, please. In case anyone's rusty with online consulting terms, synchronous refers to interactions that take place in real time. In a synchronous consultation, the consultant and writer can communicate through video, audio, and/or text chat. They may discuss the writing by sharing their screens or working together in a whiteboard space or text sharing space. Next slide, please. When choosing a synchronous platform for your center, you can consider and balance the following. Institutional context. What platforms does your institution already provide or support? Reliability. Is the video connection generally reliable and consistent? Flexibility. Are there features for varying learning and communication needs? Is the platform flexible enough for various technologies, internet browsers, or levels of internet connectivity? Accessibility. Can disabled writers participate with interpreters, screen readers, text-to-speech software, keyboard keys, etc.? And relevance. Is this technology relevant outside of your institution? Would learning this platform benefit staff and writers in future professional contexts? For highly interactive synchronous consultations, I suggest combining a video meeting platform with a text sharing platform when possible. When I worked at a Google campus, we used Google Hangouts and Google Docs with a lot of success. I currently work at a Microsoft campus, and we use Zoom and Microsoft SharePoint with success as well. Next slide, please. Next slide, sorry. The rest of my presentation, or you skipped one, sorry, can you go back one? Sorry. The rest of my presentation will focus on how Writing Center administrators can train their staff for synchronous writing consultations. As with any training, you will start by determining your learning outcomes and then designing activities that help consultants to meet those outcomes. In the synchronous training I've designed, consultants needed to build upon previous Writing Center knowledge and transfer skills from a face-to-face context to an online synchronous context. This training was also not part of a larger Writing Center course. With that in mind, the learning outcomes I suggest for synchronous training are: 1, demonstrate proficient use of the technology platform; 2, apply multimodal strategies with flexibility and creativity; 3, assist with technology troubleshooting and technological literacy; 4, utilize effective written feedback in text chat consultations; and 5, navigate between communication methods and platforms. I'll discuss each of these learning outcomes individually and suggest training activities for meeting these outcomes. Next slide, please. Learning outcome 1, demonstrate proficient use of the technology platforms. The photo on this slide shows the corners of a laptop, tablet, and smartphone on a sackcloth surface. Next slide, please. The best way to help consultants become proficient with your technology platforms is to immerse them in those platforms throughout training and to conduct the training itself online, which was an effective practice before COVID-19. To train consultants online, you can pair asynchronous and synchronous activities, record short instructional videos, 5 minutes or less, for consultants to watch on their own time, assign asynchronous activities to reflect upon or apply information from your videos, design all writing and discussion activities to be completed within your text sharing platform, schedule synchronous group meetings and mock consultations in your video meeting platform, and use group meetings for group discussion and group activities. Next slide, please. In addition to using the platforms to complete training, consultants can build proficiency through the following activities: watching short videos that introduce the technology platforms and their features, attending a synchronous consultation as a writer or observer, utilizing features of the technology platforms in training meetings and mock consultations, and recording their own videos that explain the features of the technology platforms. Next slide, please. Learning outcome 2, apply multimodal strategies with flexibility and creativity. This photo shows an open laptop and smartphone surrounded by paint tubes and a painted canvas. Once consultants have been introduced to the basics of the technology platforms, they can begin learning how to use those platforms strategically to facilitate learning. Knowing which features and strategies to use to meet the writer's needs requires flexibility and creativity. Next slide, please. I'm going to briefly overview some effective multimodal strategies for synchronous consultations based on the technology platforms that I've used. These same strategies can be transferred to face-to-face and asynchronous contexts as well. So writing and revising in real time. Without a consultant physically looking over their shoulder, writers often feel more comfortable writing and revising within a synchronous space. In a text sharing space, the consultant can even watch the revisions and provide feedback in real time. Selecting text with your cursor. In some text sharing spaces, such as Google Docs, other users can see when you have selected text with your cursor. Selecting text is a visual way of directing the writer's attention to a specific sentence or paragraph for discussion. Highlighting and color coding text. Highlighting text in color is a great way to indicate patterns for revision, such as consistent phrases that are unclear or wordy. Color can also point out areas to return for discussion or emphasize important parts of the paper, such as the thesis statement and topic sentences. Inserting comments. Comment bubbles can be used to record the writer's concerns, save notes or feedback for future reference, work on a reverse outline, or provide links to relevant resources. Screen sharing. Screen sharing is another way for consultants and writers to view a document at the same time when a text sharing space is not available or conducive. For example, screen sharing would be helpful for writers who need help formatting their dissertation. Consultants can also use screen sharing to visually model tasks, such as navigating the Writing Center's resources or using a library database. Text chatting. A text chat space can be used to summarize or record your feedback in writing, suggest revisions, or share resources and documents. In group writing sessions, it's also common for writers to leave comments in the chat while others are talking. Text chat can also be the primary method of communicating, as we will discuss in Learning Outcome 4. And lastly, recording. With the writer's permission, you can record consultations and share the video file with the writer for them to rewatch at a later time. Next slide, please. This screenshot of a synchronous consultation in Google Docs provides an example of what multimodal strategies can look like. In this example, the consultant has recorded the writer's concerns in a comment bubble in the upper right corner and has inserted another comment to remind the writer to decide on word choice. The writer has highlighted the thesis of their paper in blue and has used suggestion mode to track the revisions they are making in the document. Next slide, please. To watch multimodal strategies, consultants can watch a short video on effective multimodal strategies and a recorded synchronous consultation that models these strategies. Reflect on the multimodal practices used in the sample consultation and how those practices are similar to or different from what they already know, whether that be a face-to-face context, asynchronous context, peer review, etc. Respond to various consulting scenarios and describe multimodal practices they might use in those scenarios. And of course, apply multimodal strategies in a mock synchronous consultation. Next slide, please. Learning Outcome 3, assist with technology troubleshooting and technological literacy. In the photo for this outcome, a hand pointer hovers over a question mark with a keyboard in the background. Next slide, please. Technology issues will happen and are expected in synchronous consultations. So synchronous training can prepare consultants to troubleshoot common technology issues in the platforms they will be using. They will also likely work with writers who have not yet used the platforms before or are not comfortable with technology, so consultants may need to assist with teaching this literacy. In a synchronous consultation, consultants may do any of the following: help writers navigate to the correct location for their appointment, troubleshoot initial technology problems and any problem that occurs throughout the session, introduce or explain the features of the technology platform, prepare writers for what to do if they become disconnected or their video/audio fails during the session. A best practice is to tell writers to chat or email the consultant if something goes wrong, and suggest alternative communication methods or platforms when needed. Next slide, please. To become comfortable with troubleshooting and teaching technological literacy, consultants can watch a recorded consultation where the consultant addresses technology issues and introduces the platform. Respond to scenarios involving technology problems and describe solutions. Troubleshoot a long list of technology issues in quick succession. And practice solving technology issues, introducing the platform, and applying multimodal strategies in a mock consultation. Next slide, please. Learning Outcome 4, utilize effective written feedback in text chat consultations. The photo on the screen is a close-up of a green keyboard key with a smiley face icon. Next slide, please. It's important to remember that some writers will not have working webcams or microphones, and some writers will not be verbal communicators. Synchronous training can prepare consultants to use text chat as a primary method of communicating. Text chat consultations pull heavily from effective practices for asynchronous written feedback. Practices to teach consultants include managing time. Text chat conversations will move at a slower pace than verbal conversations, so consultants need realistic expectations about what can be accomplished in a text chat consultation. Clarifying the moves of the session. Consultants will need to clarify what they are doing and what the writer should be doing. For instance, if it's time to read through the document, the consultant can clarify which paragraphs they are going to read, invite the writer to read the same paragraphs, and then let the writer know when they have finished reading. Breaking up text. Sending messages with huge chunks of text can be overwhelming to writers and take them a while to read. Instead, consultants can send feedback in small chunks that are less overwhelming and give the writer time to begin reading while the consultant continues typing. And lastly, encouraging informality. Text chat can often reflect texting in that writers may not use punctuation or capitalization and may use emojis to convey their reactions. Consultants should be encouraged to match the informality or formality of the writer to build rapport. Next slide, please. To learn text chat consulting, consultants can analyze a sample text chat consultation for the effective practices we just discussed. We would have consultants complete this activity with a mentor so they could also learn about that mentor's experience with text chat consultations. Practice just setting the agenda through text chat. This short exercise helps consultants to alter their time expectations and receive feedback before doing a full consultation. Reflect upon and revise their text chat transcript according to feedback they received, and practice a full mock consultation through text chat. Next slide, please. And the last learning outcome we will discuss today, learning outcome 5, navigate between communication methods and platforms. On this slide, white hands are typing on a laptop keyboard. Above the keyboard are 5 icons depicting a smartphone, traditional telephone, chat bubbles, envelope, location symbol, and @ symbol. Next slide, please. Synchronous consultants may have to switch from audio to text chat or vice versa within the same appointment. Consultants may also have to track down a writer via email or telephone or switch to another platform if the writer is frustrated. This is, of course, a lot to balance at one time and is why synchronous consultations require more skill and practice than face-to-face or asynchronous consultations. Next slide, please. The previous training activities will have helped consultants to build these skills individually. Now they just need to practice bringing them all together. Consultants can practice mock consultations that require switching between multiple communication methods or platforms, and just begin consulting or co-consulting with support from a mentor and start applying their skills in real context. In my experience, consultants are often nervous about starting synchronous consultations with writers, even if they have a lot of Writing Center experience. They are worried about encountering technology issues and not remembering what to do. So I suggest scheduling them to consult at the same time as a veteran consultant or a mentor who can co-consult with them, observe, or provide support throughout their first semester. Next slide, please. And just a reminder that I have examples of these activities linked on my website, which you can use and modify for your own purposes, and I'll provide the link again in the chat. Now I'll turn it over to Megan and Kim. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle. So that was awesome, by the way. I thought that that was great. Very practical and useful things that I think we can use for training. So Kim and I are going to talk to you all a little bit about some principles for choosing tools for online Writing Center work. And this could be the tools that you use for asynchronous or synchronous tutoring, but also to think about ways that tutors can communicate with each other, especially if you are in a situation where everyone is going to be remotely working over this fall semester, because it can be difficult if there's not a way for everyone to actually communicate face-to-face. And we're also going to talk a little bit about tools that you can choose for a virtual help desk too. At the end of our presentation, we're going to give a handout where we basically have given a list of a bunch of different tools that we either have personally used or have seen other Writing Center use for these purposes, so that you can get an idea of what tools are out there, especially if you're having to make some decisions you weren't really sure where to get started. Next slide, please. So we came up with 5 principles that we think are really important for choosing those tools, or the ways that you're going to include that technology in your Writing Center. And those include comfort, cost, simplicity, support, and then accessibility or adaptability of those technologies. All right, and next slide.
So our first principle is comfort, and kind of our suggestion is that you want to consider tools that tutors and or students are already familiar with and comfortable. Right now, with the switch and move to remote and online, many students and tutors are being asked to learn and work in ways that they hadn't before and are getting inundated with new technologies and new workflows. So as you're thinking about tools, you want to think about what tools and technologies do students use in their everyday lives that they might already be comfortable with, as well as what tools and technology students are familiar with from their use at your institution. Next slide.
So the second thing that comes up is cost, and at least for me, this was something that has been very important because at the ODU Writing Center before this past year, we didn't have a budget. So trying to figure out technology that we could use while also not having money to spend on it was really important. And so this is something that I know may come up for some of you because a lot of institutions are tightening their budget during the time of crisis, which can impact the funds that you have available that you can actually use for technology tools. So one of the things that we will have on that handout is a bunch of the tools and listing if they are free or if there are free versions that you can implement, especially if it's something that your institution doesn't already use. So a couple questions to think about when you're considering cost is, do you have the funds for the tools or the subscriptions, and how much are they? This is going to be really important because some tools are really cool, but if you don't have the money to actually support keeping it around, it's probably not a good idea to introduce it. So think about what free tools are available and what constraints do you run up against with the free tools or the free versions of those tools. And then what tools or technologies do your students have access to through your institutional licenses already? This is something that sometimes we don't even realize what we have access to through our institution. And so we'd really encourage you to set up a time to talk with someone in your IT department to talk through what types of technology your institution has already purchased, whether it might be for the entire university or something that they may have purchased for a particular department already, that then you can kind of jump on that bandwagon and use that technology tool as well. Next slide, please.
Our next principle is simplicity. On this slide, there's a picture with a kind of marquee sign that says less is more. When it comes to technology, more isn't better. Like we mentioned with comfort, that students are being inundated with new right now. And so we don't want to overload students or tutors with too many tools and technologies that they need to learn and negotiate. So you want to think about what are the most important tasks that you need to be able to do for your Writing Center work, because that's going to help you prioritize tools that allow you to do that work. And you might also think about what tools allow you to accomplish more than one kind of work so that you are not using so many tools to accomplish these different tasks. Next slide. On this slide, we have a picture of an excerpt of a keyboard with a key that says help, and this is to symbolize our principle of support. You want to think about how you, tutors or students, are going to get support for using these technologies. Is the support going to be expected to come through you, or is it going to be coming through your IT department? Some tools, because they are purchased through institutional license, your IT might be the go-to for students if they are having problems with these tools or technologies. If, however, you have been the one to purchase or to implement this free tool, it's likely that you or tutors will be the ones that are responsible for doing technology troubleshooting. So what is going to be the procedure and process for that, and what support is already as part of the tool or as part of your institutional license. Next slide.
So we also wanted to mention accessibility and adaptability, to think about how accessible various tools will be for students, considering disability and technology access. So is the tool usable by those with vision or hearing impairments? What technology or internet access does this tool or technology require? This is really important when you think about your student population, and are these students going to be in a position where they don't have access to stable internet? Is it that they may not be able to use things like Janelle mentioned? They may not be able to use video. They may not be able to have enough bandwidth to make that happen. So instead, are you thinking about how that technology or that internet access is going to affect how they use that tool or not? And then also, how easily can the tool be used on mobile devices? While many of us may feel most comfortable using a computer or a laptop, anything like that, to do tutoring, a lot of students may be accessing online tutoring using a mobile device. And so it's also important to think about how the tools or technologies that you're implementing, how are those going to be viewed or seen on a mobile device, and is it accessible or not? All right, and next slide, please.
So,
okay.
Holly, can you please pull up our worksheet?
Yep, give me 2 seconds.
So as Holly is pulling this up, let me tell you what we have created. So we've created a worksheet, like Megan said, that has a list of tools that could potentially be used for Writing Center work, including tutoring, but also things like training, tutor communication, and virtual help desk. So we're going to share this on our screen, but we will also be making this available for all webinar participants and included with the video posting of the webinar. So the kind of, when we get a chance to see the tools, we have on our worksheet indicated kind of whether these are free tools, if they are free and potentially having a, thank you, Holly, potentially free and having a subscription cost, or if they will particularly have a cost. And then we have 4 tags that we have included to help you think about what functions we imagine that these tools could be used for. So we have a tag for tutoring, so this is a tool that could be used for synchronous or asynchronous tutoring. We have a tag for tutor or staff virtual communication. We have a tag for a virtual help desk and a tag for training. So we're not going to go through every single one of these tools, but what Megan and I are going to do is talk a little bit about some of the tools that we have used or considered using, and talk through some of the ways that we have kind of done that. So the first tool that I want to talk about is Canvas. That is our learning management system at York. And so we have tried to think about how we can leverage the learning management system, since that is the the system that students are most familiar with for academic work. We have worked with our IT staff to be able to create a Writing Center Canvas course where students have access to our handouts and links for resources, directions for how to make appointments, things like that. We determined that we wanted to put that material on Canvas versus our website because from some usability testing that we did with students about our services, we learned that our students don't typically go to the university website, but they are in the learning management system every day. And so it is meeting them where they are at. We're also still experimenting and exploring kind of how we can better use this. Canvas has a chat feature that we're currently investigating to see if this could be a way that students could ask us quick questions or help get information about how to make an appointment or things like that. So we're still kind of investigating all of the different kind of options. The next tool that I want to kind of point out is we have LibChat and LibAnswers. I saw someone in the chat mention that libraries can be a great kind of partner as well for thinking about tools. And this has been kind of true for us as well. Our library uses LibAnswers to build their website, and I think many libraries do, and this has an embedded chat feature. We found out from talking to our librarians that they're actually willing to have us set up our own chat using their license. So this wouldn't be an additional cost to us. Now we're still thinking through if this is something we can do, how would it be manned, things like that. But just the idea that this is an opportunity for us that doesn't cost anything versus having to investigate a new tool. I've seen in the chat too that people have mentioned Slack. Slack is the primary method that we use in our center for tutor communication. So we have multiple kind of channels set up for various topics like training, for shift coverage, things like that. As I've been kind of working and learning more about Slack, I've realized though that my tutors need additional information about kind of how to use this or what are the expectations for each of these kind of channels. So one of my projects this summer is actually creating a Slack guide for my tutors so that they have some information about particularly how I'm asking them to use this in a professional context. And then we're also thinking about how we can leverage other tutors to be able to help lead the use of Slack by having some tutors be responsible for answering the tutoring questions, having other tutors be responsible for manning the random channel and posting weekly polls and contests and fun memes as a way to establish community. And then finally, I wanted to talk about Zoom. So we do use WC Online as our appointment scheduling system. And of course, WC Online does have a synchronous tutoring module as part of it, but we have a Zoom institutional license at our school, and that is how all of our remote and online teaching has been. So this is a platform that students are more familiar with. So though it is a little bit more work and setup for me as the Rating Center Director to integrate WC Online and Zoom, it makes it simpler for students to be able to use a tool that they are comfortable with. So I'm going to turn it over to Megan to get to talk about some of the tools that she has used in her center.
Thanks, Kim. So we use WC Online as our scheduling place in our hub, also for asynchronous and synchronous tutoring. Though we do implement what Janelle talked about, which is how do you talk to students about when the technology fails and what some potential workarounds are. So for us, when the WC Online synchronous environment isn't working for a student, then we use Zoom because it's the institutional license that we have at ODU. We also use screencasting software for our asynchronous appointments. So rather than them being just text-based, we actually create a short video where the tutor verbally walks students through the feedback that they have for them. So we use Screencastify, which is made by Google, specifically because it saves all of the videos onto our university network, and we're able to share them with the other tutors as well as to share them with students. For us, Slack is our primary tutor-to-tutor communication. This worked really well for us even before we moved completely online in the spring, but it really was kind of the thing that held us together, I think, in the spring, was to have a place where we could communicate with each other, to talk about all the things that were happening in the center, but also kind of as a place where we could cheer each other on, because I know a lot of the tutors were kind of struggling, especially as we ended the end of the semester in the spring. And lastly, like we're trying to kind of decide what we want to do for our basically virtual help desk too. So we're kind of exploring some things right now and working with some other folks on campus, which I think is really important, that you don't necessarily feel alone and that you reach out to places like IT or your library and see what other people are using and if it's possible for you to use similar things. And then I think probably last but not least is that sometimes your tutors know what they want to use to communicate with each other better than even you do. Originally, I started the Slack channel because the tutors were saying that the ways that they had to communicate before I became the director there weren't working. And so they said, we need something like this. And that's really what helped me kind of come up with using Slack and choosing to use that. So I also would encourage you to talk with your veteran tutors or with previous tutors that you've had in the center and see what their needs are and what the culture of your particular campus calls for to help you make some of those decisions. And I think that's all we have. But we will make sure that everybody has a copy of this, this PDF as well. And we also made a section so that you can make comments if you're just trying to explore things a little bit. So hopefully it will be useful to you.
Thank you, everybody, so much. This is wonderful. I cannot wait to go back and watch it all again. So we're going to now move into the question and answer phase. Some of you have been posting questions in the chat, and that's great because other attendees have been able to respond, and you can have a little chat over there. But if you have formal questions that you would like our presenters to answer, please post them in the Q&A button. I see right now there's 22 questions there. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. So y'all don't need to see my 1,000 open tabs. And I'm gonna just start at the beginning of these questions. If panelists, if you feel like you want to jump in and answer anything, feel free, but I will start with the ones at the very top that came in at the beginning. A question from Courtney, and she says, hi all, in assignment management, it sounds like you're focusing on whether the writer has met the assignment requirements. We do so in our writing center by encouraging writers to send along writing assignments and rubrics, but sometimes writers only send the paper and even overlook follow-up requests to send them ahead of the appointment time. How do you address such problems?
Holly, I'd be happy to answer that question. This is Amy. That does happen a lot, and sometimes you'll get either a student that doesn't submit anything with their request or will type into the assignment description box something like paper or research essay. And so there's a couple of different things that we do. One, on our submission form, it instructs students how to copy and paste their assignment information into the form. And then also, if if we don't get anything from the student when the tutor goes to write the advice, they just put in a little blurb that will say something like, it really helps us to have your assignment requirements. If you decide to submit work to us in the future, you can just copy and paste them into the submission form. In the meantime, it looks like you're working on a narrative essay. So I'll give you feedback based on some of the common qualities of a narrative essay, but definitely check my advice against your professor's assignment requirements. So just sort of a little caveat in there that we want them to understand that we don't have access to the materials, because sometimes I think students think that you do, and that they don't need to submit them. But that way they're encouraged to do it next time, and sometimes students will even follow it up. They'll submit the request back again quickly with it. So yeah, that's how we handle that.
And I might just add one small thing to Amy's answer. This is Dan. UMGC is a little bit unique in that there's more kind of consistency across sections in terms of assignments,
Yes.
than at a lot of other schools. So sometimes when we're in a situation like that, we might be able to find the actual assignment instructions from a different session, looking back into kind of our own history there.
Exactly. And also, even with that, we do tell advisors that if you find one from another section of the same course, to definitely mention something to the student, like, it looks like some of your classmates have submitted papers with these assignment requirements, but again, definitely check them. We try and put that responsibility on the student as much as possible, while still trying to help them with what we think they're working on.
Great, thank you. Another question for asynchronous tutoring. So this could go to Amy and Dan, but others have engaged in this as well, which is, how do you help tutors manage the workload, specifically how much time they spend on each paper?
I can take first crack at this, and then Amy, you can follow up and correct me. So we mentioned in the presentation that we're aiming for tutors to spend an average of no more than 90 minutes on a session. A lot of the things that we do in the kind of initial training environment encourage them to work on their time management. A lot of the same things that you do in face-to-face centers. How do you quickly get a sense of what the students' writing issues are? How do you prioritize them? The biggest issue, I think, on our end is that just the act of writing and then pulling in resources and examples and things like that can take a little more time than a conversation normally would. A lot of our folks, basically, I should also say this, I mentioned that we don't have peer tutors in the traditional sense. A lot of our folks have been with us for 10 plus years. Over that time, they've built up large catalogs of material. So they'll have kind of go-to explanations of common situations. They'll have their own kind of library of resources that they incorporate into the advice. So all of those help with time saving. But it also becomes just sort of a getting to know what you're doing. I think every tutor gets faster over time because they're more confident. They're not questioning their pathway so much through a session. So yeah, I think we give them the skills in their initial training to manage their time well in a session. I'm not sure, Amy, do you want to add anything else to that? Because you are the go-to for this question.
I don't have anything that I need to correct. I thought that was great. The only thing I wanted to add is just in terms of our scheduling. Our schedule might work a little bit different than some writing centers, in that we ask our tutors to tell us how many papers they would like to revise a day, which days, and at which time of day. So for example, we might have tutors that say, I would like 2 papers in the morning on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And so they sort of get to know what the workload is like. And later on, they might say, I can take an extra paper on Fridays, or maybe Wednesdays are too much, so maybe I just want to take 1 paper then. So we're very flexible about how they can adjust their workload if needed. We usually encourage new tutors to start out by maybe just taking one paper a day. And then also we go in periodically and look to see how their average time works out. Are they averaging around an hour and a half per request? And then if they're not, the database coordinator and I can go in and say, hey, you know, we noticed that you're averaging a lot more time. You're above 2 hours. So let's talk about some ways that we can kind of streamline things and make things a little easier for you.
Great, thank you. We have another question. With economic downturns underway, I'm getting more pressure about paying tutors for a whole online shift rather than paying them only for booked consultation hours. I hear you, this is happening to me as well. Any advice on this dilemma? Does anyone pay tutors only for booked online consultations? It seems highly unethical to me. Maybe talk a little bit about your how you schedule, I guess.
Well, so, for us, Amy kind of just touched on this. Our tutors don't really have kind of on-call. There's no such thing as on-call in our center. So they choose up to a certain number of sessions that they'll commit to taking in a day. And then they're paid for the sessions that they do. Now that's because we're in a kind of unique situation with our whole institution, and the fact that we're not transitioning people from a situation of working a shift and being paid for the whole shift to only being paid for the time that you're working. That's been our situation from the beginning. So I'm not sure that I'm qualified to speak to the ethics of it, but that's how we've been set up.
I wonder if Kim or Megan has any ideas about that, given they are making this shift.
Sure, this is Kim. I will say that in my center, we have gone to, like, our model has always been that we paid for the full shift. So that if students have a kind of 2 hours worth of online work that they are scheduled to do on Monday, they receive that pay regardless. Basically, my thought process behind that was, if a student has a 2-hour shift in the writing center and they have no appointments, they would still be getting paid for this. Now, this was a policy that was a holdover from before the transition, because this was part of the way that I helped incentivize those that were interested in online tutoring. So this was how I was able to get people to agree to be interested in doing online tutoring. I will say that in the spring, that one of the things that I did when we switched to remote for everyone is that I added some weekly kind of readings or activities related to online tutoring. And the expectations were that if you did not have an appointment, that was when you could do that work. So that's worked for us in the spring, was that there were training readings or activities to do if they did not have an appointment.
Great, thank you. There's so many questions. I hope we're going to get to all of them. We're going to do our very best. I have a question here of who's in charge of designing the online writing materials that can help writers to develop as writers? Do the tutors do that in your centers? How do you farm out that work particularly?
Well, I can take that question.
Great.
For us, this has been something that I do allow the tutors to take part in it, and I do look at those things too before we ever post them or anything like that. But we also have like an editorial team of some of the tutors that basically when they have downtime, this is something that they work on. And they also encourage some of the other tutors to work on those things, and they kind of act as an editorial board and go through any of the contributions that other tutors make, kind of like as a little bit of a vetting process to make sure that the entire center is kind of on the same page whenever those resources are being shared.
If there is a question over in the chat that you are particularly excited about getting answered, there's a little thumbs up mark. You can kind of push it up to the top so that I can see it. This question is for Amy and Dan. How have you accommodated students who may be viewing your advice templates on a phone screen on which some textual embellishments and asynchronous feedback don't appear? We found, for example, that students using phones could not color, highlighting, underlining, make blah, blah, etc. So wondering if you have some ideas. It looks like Lexi gave them some thoughts in the chat here, but if you have any additional advice, we'd appreciate it.
Sure thing. This is Amy. We don't use the insert comment feature at all. We paste the students' paper below our advice just so everything's in the same document, but we don't insert any comments in it at all. And then in terms of highlighting and underlining, I mean, we encourage tutors to use that, you know, to make it visually interesting, but also to keep in mind that students may be using a tablet or a phone or something like that to view advice. And that's a really vague answer. So if anybody else wants to jump in with ideas, please do.
I'd also just say this might be one of the places where UMGC being what it is makes our situation a little different, because our students are taking all of their courses online as well, right? They've never been dependent upon a campus computer lab. Whatever they're doing, they already have at home the technology that they need to be successful in class, which is the same technology they'd be using in order to access Writing Center advice. So we're not currently optimized for viewing on a phone, that's true. But, and Amy, I don't know if you can speak to this. I don't also recall any students complaining about that.
No, it hasn't come up, like you said. I mean, your answer is much better than mine, just that they're already sort of prepared to be doing all of their work online.
Janelle, I know that your students are also all online, but do you have any thoughts about this question, since a lot of your synchronous stuff uses these modalities or these tools, but do you ever run into that problem with people trying to do synchronous from their phones?
Yes. So a lot of our students are returning adults. So a lot of them might not even be using smartphones. So a lot of them can be on computers. I've had some of them come into the video room on a tablet. So they're looking at me on a tablet, but they are looking at their writing on a computer. So in terms of synchronous, yeah, for Zoom on the phone, they can't really look, they can't see the screen if you're screen sharing if they're on the phone. So in that case, you just have to adjust. So if they can't see the screen and they tell you that, then you just have to be really clear verbally about where you are in the paper and what your suggestions are, and perhaps type them up something in writing that you could email them afterwards so that they do have something recorded down. Or if you have access to their document, even making notes or comments in the document, emailing them to that afterwards so that they have a copy, even if they couldn't view it during the session.
This is a question about Canvas. There's some answers already in the Q&A section, but I'll throw it out there, especially since Kim specifically talked about Canvas. Does anybody have any specific resources or for using Canvas to support the Writing Center? We recently moved to Canvas, and it seems like a class-only format rather than an LMS that can be used no matter the academic year or course. This person said they're also gonna look at the materials you shared, Janelle, but anything quickly that any of you would like to share about that, or resources or where to go about how to use Canvas for non-course oriented things?
So this is Kim. I will say that we've been working a lot with our instructional designers. One of the options that we are looking at is that Canvas has the option to create a public course. So that is one way that we are looking into that, so that it is less work of having to kind of enroll students every year, every semester, and kind of keeping track of that. In terms of moving away from just a course-based use of it, Canvas has quite a bit of adaptability for kind of changing what is viewed. So we have eliminated a lot of the tools that are there. So things like the syllabus, assignments, things like that. We're not using Canvas at all for tutoring. It is just being used as an information kind of portal for students. So we have really only used the module feature and the pages as part of Canvas to leverage information about particular topics and having pages with links embedded within them and information about how to make an appointment, who our tutors are, and having direct links to be able to make an appointment in WC Online.
Thanks, Kim. This is Holly. So some people are hoping that when you create your Slack guide, you'll share it. So please, Megan, Kim, whoever's creating that, we would totally appreciate seeing that. Here's another question. How do you balance the need for advanced training before tutors begin and the limitations of time and money and how much students can learn at one time? We already have a full week of curriculum for new tutors as they prepare for the interpersonal dynamic of tutoring. Adding specific content for online tutorials seems really important, but I don't know what, it moved away, but I don't know what to, or I don't want to only provide logistical technology training before their first appointments. Ideas for what is most important before they start their jobs and what can be learned as they go, I assume in relation to online tutoring.
So this is Janelle. So I'm not sure if you're if your consultants are only going to be doing synchronous or if they're going to be doing a variety of different types of contexts and you're needing to train them for all of them at the same time. But if they're starting with synchronous, they will need to use the platform before they're able to do anything or apply any theory that you teach them. And in terms of any overall theory, I would suggest using a lens of accessibility and disability because that teaches them concepts they can apply to synchronous, face-to-face, and asynchronous because it encourages them to be flexible and do whatever is going to benefit that student. And if they have that flexibility, they'll probably figure out how to use some of those tools on their own. And then you can give more specific instruction about reflecting on specific tools and specific practices. Or even additional pedagogies as you continue with training.
This is Holly. Related to this, how do you train tutors to manage the emotional labor of tutoring online? I imagine increases in remote learning and screen time will result in increased physical and emotional fatigue. Has anybody dealt with that feels like they could answer that question?
This is Megan. I can a little bit. For us, one of the things that I really encourage tutors to do is I try to make sure that there is a 15-minute gap between when they finish an appointment and when they start the next appointment. And the reason why I think that time is so important, and I felt this way in person too, but even more so now that we're online, is that I encourage them to get up, to do things like take a short walk, go outside, grab some coffee or some water, do things to take care of yourself in between. Don't just continue to sit at that computer for another 15 minutes while you wait on the next appointment. And I think that that's been helpful. The other thing is that I try to get tutors to spend the time that they are going to be online, if they're not in an appointment, actually socializing with the other tutors. So this gives them a place where they can talk about the things that are frustrating them. They can, you know, talk about their frustrations with the class that they're in or anything like that, so that they have a place where they feel like they're not isolated and they can talk to someone and it's not all just about business. So I hope that helps.
This is Holly. I think this is going to be something all of us are navigating this year, especially as students are adjusting, to both our writers and our tutors, professional or student, as we transition to online. It's definitely something that I hope somebody is really thinking through and maybe can develop a training for that we could offer in the fall at some point, which would be really great. Let's see what else is going on over here in the chat. There are so many questions. I'm so excited. Do any of you have suggestions for the orientation for Writing Center student access at community colleges that reflects the focus of Writing Centers needing to be online remote for students who still want face-to-face and are anticipating that their classes will still be meeting that way? We're finding that classes switch to online lose enrollment and those students look to move to an in-seat class. So those of us that are only going, if I can think what this is, you know, we're gonna be moving all online, many of us, but students may still be having in-class meetings. And how are we communicating that or sharing that information with students about online tutoring and not losing those students who really need to come to us but are concerned about what it means to be online? I really interpreted that question a lot, Suzanne, so I hope that's what you meant by all of that, but I will now turn it over to the panelists. Silence fills the Zoom. So maybe you've hit on something here, Suzanne. This is a challenge. We're trying to create another workshop from IWCA that will talk about online marketing and how to recruit or encourage students to come online. And so this could be something that I try to work into that workshop when we have the details. When we have the details, I'll share them with the IWCA and Writing Center community. But I think this is a concern a lot of people have. How do we market? How do we get people to come when it's not usual for students or the status quo? Okay, let's see. There's another question about encouraging people to come, so stay tuned. I have another question for Dan and Amy. When it comes to asynchronous tutoring, my concern is that it can become too instructional. Do tutors take special precautions to avoid becoming paper editors?
They absolutely do, and Amy touched on that a little bit, but I'd love to hear her expand further on it.
One of the things that we try and do, and this is going to sound really obvious, is we remind them that they're not, and that the most important thing that they need to be focusing on is not just pointing out issues in the writing or areas for revision, but also that they need to be explaining how to revise, why to revise. And then one of the most difficult things is helping students to find additional instances of comma splices or semicolon problems or, citation issues in the paper. And each tutor kind of develops their own strategy for that. Some will say, use the Control F function in Word and find all of the semicolons and make sure each one has this on each side of it. But that's, we make it clear to students that we're not editors right at the beginning, but there is sometimes, we all have that editorial urge, I think, whether or not we'd like to acknowledge it. And that's, again, something that we do with just check-ins with student work. If we find, with tutors' work, we find that a lot of their advice seems to be saying, you need to fix this comma splice. Here's an example of how to fix a comma splice. And then there's nothing else. We try and emphasize that this is a lesson. And at the same time, we don't want it to sound too canned, or we don't want it to sound too boilerplate, so that when they're reading it, it's something like, when I'm working on a paper and I know I need to be making sure that all of my citations are in the correct format, this is something that I do. But sort of sharing writing method is something else that's really helpful.
So this is Holly again. Unfortunately, we're coming very close to the end of our time. We just have 2 minutes left, and I thought that I would just open it up to the presenters if there's any last words of advice or anything that they would like to let people know about. I will say that we will try to get all of these materials onto the IWCA website. I have everything, if it all goes well, I have everything recording. And so a chat transcript, a transcript of the webinar, the gallery views, and the presentation should all be available, fingers crossed. But last thoughts from anybody out there on the panel?
This is Janelle. I would just say in general, I've worked at 3 brick and mortar schools and 1 fully online school. And so I just want everyone to know that it's perfectly possible to have really great connections and relationships over online consultations. And in many cases, I actually have better relationships with my coworkers and other people on campus in a fully online environment than I ever did in a brick and mortar environment. So I would just really encourage you that it's perfectly possible to have really great sessions online and for your students to learn very well and connect with your tutors.
This is Dan. I would just 100% echo what Janelle just said. That was very well put.
Yeah, this is Amy. Absolutely. I have colleagues that, I've worked with for more than 10 years that I've never laid eyes on. But I considered them to be, close friends as well as colleagues. And I think that's something that you can definitely foster in your writing center. And it's our tutors really love what they do. And I think it might surprise a lot of people how much they enjoy it.
Thank you all so much. We will get through the next several months online together. And I hope that, I hope it's not just a matter of getting through. I hope we really learn a lot over these next several months about what it means to work online and how we work out with students well. I just see a lot of avenues for, just a lot of avenues for learning over the next several months. So thank you all for attending. I appreciate each and every one of you. A big round of applause to our 5 presenters today. Thank you. Thank you to our interpreters, Katie and Valerie. Thank you so much. And I will see you all again soon. Take care, everybody.
Holly, one more question. People were asking, where will this information be housed? Like, how can people get access to the documents, the presentations, the recording?
So everything that we can make everything available on the IWCA website. And so check there shortly. I'll put everything there. I know some of you have been sharing things in the chat. If I can figure out how to extract emails, I'll send them, but check on the website in the next week or so for all of this information. Thanks, Megan. All right, y'all. Take care. Have a great rest of your week. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.